the Public Safety Committee meeting for July. Let's start with introductions and start with the under the weather, Mr. Dunbar.
Forrest Dunbar.
Amy Motley.
That'll be great, man.
Jill Evans.
Jack Frost.
Rob Hicks.
Belinda Freeman from the Department of Health and Human Services.
Dennis LeBlanc. Chief Talley, Police Department.
And since there's not that many of us here, if we can just have the audience introduce yourselves as well.
Now, Middle Flooding, we're here at UNICOM.
Leroy Falk with KTU News. Mallory People.
In the back, please.
Paula Dobbin Johnson.
Doug Borowski, Safety Center. Patrick Sager, Safety Center.
Thank you. We have what looks like a fairly light agenda today for this committee. We're working summer hours apparently. And we'll start with Police Chief Talley and a review of the dashboard. We haven't seen another dashboard, and I think we have to kind of work out our logistics of how you want to do that. But do you have one there? So?
Yes, Mr. Chair. If you don't mind, I'd like to come back to the dashboard later because I noticed some discrepancies in the numbers and they're preparing a more accurate report. I'm going to bring it to me in a moment.
Okay.
So if you don't mind, getting by me on the dashboard,
Not a problem. We can do the other item that you've got on your list and come back to you later if we need to.
Okay, so I am happy to report that due to the Birdwood traffic detail that we had over the 4th of July holiday, we tried to communicate to the public this is a very dangerous stretch of roadways, it is a safety zone, and we partnered up with the Alaska State Troopers and funding from the state, and we were able to put a detail out on the highways. As a result of that, we had 131 contacts with motorists, 51 speeding cars. The top was 121 miles an hour in a 65 zone, and that's a fine of $3,360 plus a $10 surcharge, so a total of $3,370. The driver admitted to 130 miles per hour. There were 3 no proof of insurance, 3 operating without a license, 3 expired registrations, 2 for tinted windows, 1 texting while driving, 1 arrest for driving with license suspended, 1 misdemeanor warrant arrest, a total of 130 hours of work between 9 officers. So I'm happy to report that there were no accidents along that stretch of highway, and more importantly, what often can be a very deadly time of the year for us, there's no fatality before the either. So very, very pleased with working out with the troopers and keeping the citizens of Anchorage safe.
Good work, Chief. I think Ms. Gray Jackson has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that's an outstanding report. I'm so really glad to hear it, especially because a constituent or somebody in the community wrote an email complaining about all the cop cars. You know, and first I want to thank you for responding to him so quickly, but I mean, this is proof how necessary it was, and I'm just thrilled, frankly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And Chief, as far as the fines, I know you're working sort of on money funded by the state. Do the traffic fines come to the city or do they go to the state?
Those will, the ones that we wrote will come to the city. The other thing you've asked for an update on are stolen vehicles. I'm happy to report between April and May, we had a 30% drop in stolen vehicles. Why is this significant? Because during April, we made 22 arrests of associates involved in stealing these vehicles and burglarizing shops. Over 100 of the stolen vehicles were associated with these individuals. So we're still working with prosecutors and looking at additional charges and things like that, but we have seen the decline. Our year-to-date totals at the end of May are at 795, which is almost double what it was last year, but we're hoping this 30% drop is a trend now that we have spiked. Urge citizens to make sure they do not leave keys in their car and they lock them up, as well as when you're dropping your car off for service, having your tires changed, any type of auto shop and all, talk with the owners of the establishment and find out what they do for security of your vehicle in the absence of employees being on the premise, and what do they do with your keys and things like that. Just very, very important. Also wanted to bring something to attention to the Public Safety Committee that perhaps we may want to look into. Thank you. Next, we had 2 incidents over the holiday weekend, and that involved Northern 911. Apparently, several companies across the U.S. and Canada have routed calls to a Canada call center for 911 calls, and then forward the calls to our non-emergency number, and they go into a wait queue. This is apparently done to save 911 surcharges. So maybe this is something Assembly's going to have to take action on, mandating businesses and so on to do that. We are going to work with the local hotels and so on and try to get that message out that it does delay services, and we urge the Public Safety Committee to possibly take a look at that too. And I have some other information I could share with you. Apparently in California, they had some pretty unfortunate incidents where the calls were rerouted through this call center, and then due to delays of services. But we had 2 such incidents ourselves here in Anchorage over holidays.
Mr. Mouse.
Chief, I want to make sure I heard you right. Now, these carriers are cell carriers that's rerouting?
So what happens is, for example, in our situation is hotels, that if you call 911, they're routing through a call center to save on the 911 surcharges locally. So the call goes
So
to
it's
Canada.
just hotels?
In Anchorage, I don't know elsewhere in the nation. I know of an incident in
Yeah.
California where allegedly a child died as a result of delayed 911 calls.
Is it narrowed to a specific couple of hotels, or is it just across the board?
I know of 2 hotels that this happened at here in Anchorage. We had 2 calls over the weekend that we identified. One was a medical emergency, and a passerby got on his or her cell phone while the other person held on the 911 call through the call center. Unfortunately, we had a good turnout in that incident, but it was a failure of making this type of notification to the 911.
Did you have a chance to talk to these 2 hotels?
Have not yet.
Management?
This has just happened over the weekend, and we researched and we pulled the calls, and we're trying to figure out how problematic this potentially could be.
Yeah, well, when a person dies, it's very problematic.
Yes, ma'am.
So 2 questions, and I'm willing to just step back here. Number 1, after you make contact, or if you'd rather us make contact, I'm sure somebody on the Public Safety Committee would be happy to do that. We would either like to be able to do that. I hope I'm not speaking way too much. We would like to do that immediately, or we'd like a report once you do it, or have one of your officers do it. So I don't know if you're willing to give out the names of the hotels, but we're definitely willing to help you be proactive.
Thank you.
Because I'm sure the management, once they are aware of the problem, I'm sure they'll rectify it quickly.
Yes, it could be something that just is part of the national policy for a particular chain of hotels and so on. And we're looking at as potential cost savings, but when you look at the risk management aspects of it, it may not.
So which route would you prefer to take? Would you like APD to make contact, or would you like the Public Safety Committee?
Can we get back to you on that? Do you mind?
No, I don't mind. Mr. Evans is the chair, so.
Mr. Chair, if it's okay with you, I'd like to internally discuss a little bit more to make sure we're approaching this properly and make sure we're not violating any privacy information dealing with the hotels, and that's why we're reluctant to make the meetings.
And that's why I say there's a couple ways we can do it. But if it's, maybe the Public Safety Committee or, an assembly member issues a letter just to all the hotels, blanket saying, hey, we've recognized this comes up. Or if it's just a conversation, just stop by and talk to the manager. I don't think we have to come down heavy-handed, but like I said, they may not even realize it. They probably don't. All right, thanks.
Thank you. And now I have the dashboard here. Thank you, Laura. So at the request of the chair in the Public Safety Committee, we've come up with the police department's dashboard. The first sheet shows by assembly districts. First box is calls for service. The bottom box is arrest. And then the right side graph is call types, year to date. And again, the districts are the assembly districts. Down the left-hand side on the two left charts and across the top of the right-hand chart. So you can see that we've taken in 125,000, almost 125.5 calls for service, averaging just over 20,000 calls per month.
Chief,
Yes.
what are we defining calls as? Does that include online contact? I know some people report incidents online. Is that everything included in this as a call?
No, this is calls into our emergency 911 center. So those items that are reported through records could have started out that way and then ultimately referred to the report section and it handled that way, but these are calls that come into this.
Mr. Bosky?
Thank you, Mr. Evans. It's going right where I was gonna go. So one of the questions and concerns we had, and I know I've gotten mixed messages, but I've been told some of these reports for services do include the online reporting. But then when we had the town hall in Eagle River, a lot of people were skeptical, and so we were gonna get clarification. So this doesn't
So
include.
that's a different
I just wanna make
question.
sure I'm
Yep.
understanding it.
Yep, it's my understanding that the total calls is for service by month of district. Now, that's not the number of crimes in calls
the next page.
reported on the other side, right?
Okay, got it.
Okay, so we turn to the next page, we see the crime data report.
Okay.
And that's the top 20 incidents.
But this one
Those are
isn't.
citations,
This one isn't broken out by district.
correct. That's a traffic. The top 20 citations given, and then the last one, the last report is going to be our personnel. So this is the first time we're doing this, is presenting the dashboard, and it's sort of a work in progress for not only the police department, but I think for the public safety committee, and very amenable to any way we can do questions answered, things like that, that we can make this very productive for you.
And going forward, Chief, the one thing that could be helpful is that if you could have depending on your timelines, if the dashboard can be ready a couple days before our meetings, and if you can send it to Mandy, and she can distribute it to us in advance of the meeting, that way we can kind of look at it, see.
That'd be really
jumps out.
helpful. The only thing I would suggest is that we do it at least, so for example, this has up through the end of May, the end of June, whereas that information really is still being tallied and so on, and there could be some ultimately discrepancies in this. So maybe if we did it, when we have our meetings early in the month like this, for example, if we would have done just the May statistics, that would have probably been helpful to leave off June and make it more accurate as opposed to putting out information over and over, changing.
Yeah, I think that since we have our meeting is always the first Wednesday, I think, of the month, having a lag month in there makes a lot of sense for the statistics, and you can update us at the meeting if there are noticeable changes that have occurred more recently.
And that'd be really helpful for us too, to get this out in advance to you, because even this morning, I had our staff reworking these, because I didn't like how the numbers had matched up and so on. I could see some inaccuracies in it. And it happens when you're using multiple systems. And I will get to the bottom of truly what this reflects as far as those taking note online or called in, self-reported items, people walking into the station, as opposed to actual calls where officers are dispatched to the community and conducting investigations.
And I also presume, Chief, that this represents, the calls could represent multiple calls for the same incident.
It
It's
could.
3 or 4 people called in on something. It's 3
Such
calls.
as shots being fired off in an area, and they come through as fireworks, and they come through as guns being fired, and it might become call for medical assistance. Ultimately, those become one incident, so but could have multiple calls.
Ms. Zabowski.
You're gonna think I'm an idiot, but I have to go back to this just so I make sure I understand. So, I know you said you're gonna look into it. When I'm looking at calls for service by category, those were the actual calls where officers are being dispatched, they're getting in the queue, people are going out to make contact. Those don't necessarily reflect the online reports. So I'm thinking of like property crime or something that somebody has to fill out an online report, but they don't actually need somebody to come out. So am I understanding that correctly? Is that how you believe it is right now?
I believe that's the way it is.
Okay, so, when I look at the crime data report on the second page, it's primarily, it looks like, traffic violations.
Yes.
Carpet violations. So what would be helpful, one of the things I'm trying to track in Eagle River specifically is, any escalation in property crime, drug crimes, those kinds of things. So if they're included in these numbers, then that would make sense, you know. But if they're not included, if you can include those categories when we're talking about things that might, maybe not just driving, but things that might impact the community, does that make sense?
Sure, so property crimes, through on the first sheet, property crimes is the second category,
Right.
and we see by district.
Yeah, and I see that, I just don't
And
know if
then
those
drugs and
online,
alcohol.
yeah, and if those online reports are included in here, then you're already good to go. But if they're not included in there, I just wanna make sure we get, like you said, you're pulling from multiple systems. So I just wanna make sure there's some place where we can see if there's trending and trending that has all the data. Does that make sense?
Yes, ma'am.
Thanks.
That's all I have.
Thanks, Chief. We do appreciate your work. You know, it's kind of a work in progress for all of us. And we'll keep fine tuning this. I think in the long run, once we get it all settled, it'll be a useful tool for all of us. So we do appreciate all the people, I'm sure, that are working on it at your department.
I will let them know that. Thank you.
Okay, moving on. Chief LeBlanc.
Going out of order, huh?
Oh, I am. Thank you for the correction. Mr. Frost, code enforcement.
Our dashboards are still a work in progress, and frankly, the 4th of July caught me short, and I was, in my mind, this meeting was next week, so I apologize.
No problem.
The only thing we have to report really is our code enforcement position for the marijuana inspections. The announcement's closed, we have a certification list, and we'll begin interviews Friday, so hopefully in the next few weeks, we'll have a new hire and start that training, but that's pretty much what we have today. Thank you.
And if there are, any of the members of the committee have any type of issues that they would like to see, you know, within code enforcement's purview on the dashboard, please contact Frost and let them know what work goes in. Otherwise, we'll rely on you to give us some statistics that show us what you're doing.
Thank you.
Ms. Wojcik?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to thank Mr. Foss for dealing with one of his training my constituents' issues so quickly. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Something further? No. Chief LeBlanc.
So I've got the dashboard as the second attachment, and then I'll really actually talk from the cover sheet where I highlighted some of the highlights that I'd like to talk about.
Thank you.
And one of the things you'll note on the dashboard, the second attachment, is we are doing what we think is probably the best. It shows the data through May, because June just closed out, so in order to show the accuracy of the numbers, we're 1 month lag. And if you just refer to that second page for the moment, you'll see most of these data points will remain fairly static. For example, structure fires are actually less than 3% of what we do. We're an EMS heavy fire department. Most of our calls have to do with medicine, as you can see. Rescue and EMS, nearly 70% of what we do. I actually, coming in this morning, I elected to come down Minnesota from from South Anchorage. And, we responded to a homeless camp down in the woods to the northeast corner of International in Minnesota. Had a drug overdose there, and firemen are going down the hill, fairly large patient. Took about 8 people to get the person up the side of the hill and into the ambulance, and just homeless camp, although it pretty well established. And that's most of what we're doing these days, is responding to those kinds of medical emergencies. But, so on the first page, the first polka dot just references the dashboard. And please, as you look through that, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, suggestions, be more than happy to take that in. We've got a statistician that holds that data together, and we do lag it a month, so it should remain accurate as you see it. First, kudos to the community from the fire department's perspective. Fireworks behavior this past weekend was very, very good. I think the fires in Fort McMurray, Canada, the videos that everybody saw of the complete destruction there, as well as the fires burning in California in the days in advance of July 4th, alerted people to the potential for wildland fire. So everybody, from my perspective, was on very good behavior. Kudos to them. We had a graduation. Chairman. Elder Gray Jackson was there, a keynote speaker Friday night. Forrest was there. Had probably about 250 people in attendance as we graduated 17 firefighters, 2 of which were women, and 2 of the 17 were also paramedics. So very, very successful. This is the second day. We had about 5 people report to work yesterday, another 5 today, and then I think 7 report tomorrow. So at the end of the day tomorrow, all of the firefighters will have at least pulled their first shift. One of the things that we're looking at closely is what we call out-of-service area responses, and I'll just highlight a couple of things. And this excludes the Chugiak volunteers and the Girdwood volunteers. But when the Anchorage Fire Department responds out of its service area to other areas within the municipality, there is a billing process, because right now people in the Anchorage Fire Service area pay a mill rate for that fire service protection. So when we respond out of the service area, we bill. There's a lot of misconception about the amount of money we bill. So I'm using an example here of a restaurant fire response that we responded to earlier in June. And as you can see, we had 17 units dispatched, 14 from Anchorage Fire Department, and 3 responded from the Girdwood Fire Department. We were on scene a cumulative amount of time of over 30 hours, and the total bill to the owner of that building was just over $1,500. There's a lot of perception that there's tens and tens of thousands of dollars. The way the ordinance is worded right now, as you'll see here, it's $500 for the first hour, and then for every additional hour an apparatus is on scene, it's $100. So if you were a building owner, you might elect not to pay for fire insurance if you're outside of the fire service area, because you're betting on the come that even if you have a fire, you're only going to give to the fire department $1,500. I think that is ridiculously cheap, and we're going to be looking at proposing a more balanced bill to people who may have the advantage of living outside of the fire service area, but yet they still depend on the Anchorage Chugiak volunteer fire departments to respond to them. So I think that's an interesting statistic. I'm sure most of you would not have believed that 17 units responding for a total of 30 hours. Cumulative payback to the city is $1,500. One of the issues on out of municipality responses that we're dealing with Girdwood, because Girdwood has its own suite of issues right now with the police and Whittier responses. What we're finding is the Kenai Borough, and I don't mean to speak unfairly about the borough because we haven't engaged them in conversation yet, but we're finding that the borough response to Jernigan Pass, to Hope, to the areas immediately south of Portage, for example, where the wildlife refuge is, Girdwood responds. they're the only ones who do respond. And we don't know of any billing process at all. So we're going to be reaching out to the Kenai Peninsula Borough and engaging them in conversations and making it very clear to the public who will respond if they have an emergency in that area, and what costs may be associated with that. You recall last summer we had a couple of fairly significant tourist budget issues, and we responded even from Anchorage in those particular cases, and there's really no way to bill. And right now, at the Hope cutoff is as far as any Kenai emergency services will go. So if you're from the Hope cutoff over to Portage, you're basically in no person's land. It's a little bit like the municipality of Anchorage Fire Department responding in Cook Inlet for water rescues. That's really Coast Guard, but there is no Coast Guard. So when somebody calls 911, when they're stuck in the middle of the inlet, we go because we have boats. But is that fair to the rest of the taxpayers that we're basically subsidizing people who are out of our service area?
A couple of questions for you, Chief. Mr. Dunbar and then Mr. Steele.
Yeah, thank you, Chief. And, I appreciate you having this conversation and telling us about the Kenai Borough. I think this relates to a question I asked you at the last committee hearing, which is when there is a wildland fire in the municipality but outside of the service area, is there a billing mechanism? And if we have to send units to respond. So as you're looking to revise this, and I hope that you consider that as well.
Yes. And as you know, whenever we have a wildland fire, our first call is to the Division of Forestry, because they're the folks that are capable of fighting a wildland fire. We're basically a structure protection fire department. But we can go a little bit into the woods, but we can only go as far as our hoses will go. So, it's a good point, thank you. Last thing, I just share with you another area that we're going to be focusing on.
1 second, Chief.
Yep.
Mr. Steele.
Yeah, I was wondering about, you mentioned Hope. Do they have a volunteer fire department that has some equipment, or do they have some infrastructure of some sort?
I think so, but
Hydrants?
still, I don't really know.
Boy, that's a huge risk. I bet they're paying a lot of homeowners insurance.
So since I became chief last year, we focused a lot on strengthening the maintenance shop that we have, adding staff to fire prevention, thanks to the Assembly for doing that during the first quarter, as well as our information technology group. The next group that we need to focus on is our call center, the dispatch group. And just showing you a couple of statistics here, 2013, 2014, fairly static at about 148 to 157, 158,000 calls per year. And then there was a significant spike in 2015 when the Anchorage Fire Department Dispatch Center took over the responsibility for the community safety patrol. And we didn't add any people at that time, nor did we add any dollars to the group. But we're going to be looking at significantly increasing the staffing in our dispatch center. Our minimum staffing is 3, 24/7, and we're at minimums far too many times right now. And basically, if there are just 3 people in the dispatch center, using a restroom is even problematic. So you'll be hearing more from me in the future about how we're going to grow and strengthen the Anchorage Fire Department Dispatch Center. That's all I have to say. Do you have any questions?
Thanks, Chief. Appreciate it. A lot of good and somewhat surprising information. And as with the others, if there are other information, other tweaks you want to make to the dashboard that you think would be valuable, please do so. It's a work in progress. We do appreciate your work on it. Thanks. And with that, we'll turn to Ms. Freeman.
Well, thank you. So a few updates for the committee today. One is that we are continuing to monitor locally and nationally the Zika virus and any progress that that virus is making. We, of course, do not have any cases at this time in Alaska, and we hope to keep it that way, although it is a very unique virus in that it has several areas of transmission. And there is, I think, at least one case, I believe it's in Florida now, of a child born with microcephaly. So that is of great concern, but I don't think we need to be in any way overly concerned about that in Alaska at this time. We keep the administration apprised of that. In addition, with the first quarter budget revisions that were approved, we have specific funding for marijuana education efforts. We are partnering with the state of Alaska that has developed quite a good public service announcement. So utilizing our internal resources, utilizing that specific funding, we'll be partnering with them to distribute, disseminate the PSAs on marijuana educational efforts. The PSA currently has a broad range of broad range of audience, I'll say at this point, where it tries to educate families, parents, young people. It talks about if a person is pregnant and all sorts of other areas that people need to pay attention to now that marijuana is legalized. So you'll be seeing those as soon as they're approved. And I hope that you will find those to be useful and that our community is responsive to these particular educational efforts. And those are the primary focus areas we announced last month. That we'll be having services at the library, and we currently have staff that are working at the Hoosac Library right now to intervene and provide information for vulnerable individuals. And then we will have an MSW, Masters in Social Work student, starting in August at the library.
Any questions for Dr. Frame?
Lynn, just on the marijuana education piece, it seems to me one of the areas that I'm surprised about, or that seems kind of new and different, are the edibles and people basically taking too many because the effect of it is delayed. Is part of the education process going to be with respect to those kind of new kind of marijuana issues?
Yes, the PSA again is a fairly appealing kind of, it hits all target audiences, and one of the areas are edibles and just trying to educate the public as to the potential time lag between the consumption and the effect. And of course, as we recognize, that can be different for every single individual, the amounts. But it's the basic gist of it is this is not your grandmother's marijuana, so to speak. This is not marijuana that was produced in the 60s. This is much more potent. It has a higher potency rate, a different impact, whether you're for smoking or digesting it. And so we're trying to hit all of those areas, and I think it does a pretty good job in a very short spot. And then we'll be using social media for these, TV and radio.
Any questions? We don't want to leave you out as far as dashboards go. If there are statistics that you think would be helpful to the committee with respect to your department, I'll be glad to work with you and see if there's something we can produce.
Probably the, whether it's animal control or the English Safety Patrol. We have our two leads, of course, from the English Safety Patrol here, Dr. Dombrowski and Patrick. And so that would be perhaps valuable to provide either a monthly or a quarterly update in advance, so you can look at the statistics of intakes, calls. Of course, we appreciate our partnership with AFD, who handles all the dispatching, and that has proven to be extremely effective for the maximum utilization of our staff and AFD staff. So we could look at providing that for you, if that would be useful.
That would be great.
Animal control as well, if that would be meaningful to you. The rest of our services are so unique, whether it's vaccinations, the cemetery services and things like that. I think those two would be the most useful, is the animal control and the English Safety Patrol statistics.
Sounds like it. Thank you. And before we move on real quick, just going back to Chief Lamont. Again, as I told Chief Talley, if we can arrange the schedule to have the dashboard sent to Mandy a couple days in advance, that would be helpful. Good. And also, if you one of the issues, because we have the homelessness committee, and we're dealing with some of these overlapping issues, to the extent any of these statistics can be broken out by your department, as to, you know, the services provided to that community like you're talking about today, to give us sort of a sense of how much of your time and resources are being spent in that area, that would also be helpful. And I'll leave it to you to figure out what's the best way to convey it.
For example, Spice is now about 4 to 5% of our daily routine, down significantly from the high of 20+% in October.
I'm sure we'll find something to replace that one.
Yeah.
And finally, the issue you had about the cost of the out of service for the 30 hours and stuff. To the extent you can provide us with what you believe your actual costs were for that same operation, as opposed to the $1,500 in response, that would be good to see too. Okay, moving on. Emergency management.
Well, this will be a short report, really. We're continuing our orientation training for the new members of the Emergency Operations Center. We have a bunch of people coming aboard. And we're continuing working with the Health Department on the pet sheltering plans and what they need to help them get that off the ground. That's about it right now.
Any questions? All right, seeing none, we'll move along. There's no old business listed. Under new business, we had listed the referral from the safety hour for the bars on request of Mr. Dunbar. We're going to push that off to next month. I was late getting in touch with some folks that would be helpful to that discussion, and we'll try to get them in next month and have a broader discussion about that topic and see what the status is of the bar safety hour and what if that program can be approved or what needs to be done. With that, we'll move along quickly. Policing in Girdwood. I know this is not going to be an in-depth presentation, but I just wanted to get a quick sense from the administration as to how that went. For those that don't know, Forest Fair this past weekend, big event in Girdwood, kind of fell in the gap between the state troopers pulling out and getting anything else in place. A lot of people in the administration, I know Mr. Falsey, Mr. Whittleton, very involved in pulling something together very quickly that, by all accounts that I've heard, at least via emails and stuff, went together very well. So I don't know, Bill, if you want to give us any update on that?
Yeah, I can give you a preliminary update. We haven't had a chance to formally sit down and debrief with either the Girdwood Board of Supervisors or with your police, so we're hoping to do that meeting today. The preliminary feedback we have heard is all been over the email chains, and as you said, it's been uniformly positive. It seems like it was a good experience. The statistics that were sent to me were, according to Whittier Police Chief Schofield, there were approximately 125 contacts made during the course of the fair. That included 1 arrest, 1 vehicle accident, many traffic stops, and several citations. There was, in fact, a break-in at one of the cabins that Whittier PD was able to respond to very timely, and that was the arrest, as I understand it. And I think the thinking on the ground in Girdwood is that had the troopers been policing the fair as they normally had in the past years, the response time would have been such that would have been a harder incident to respond to. So all responses so far seem to be good. We're hopeful that some lessons learned over the weekend will roll over into the contract negotiations for the longer term solutions.
Mr. Dunbar.
Bill, did we allocate any additional funding for that, or is that just sort of eaten up in the IPT budget?
The chair, neither. So this contract was specifically negotiated between the Girdwood Board of Supervisors and the Whittier Police Department. I believe the final dollar cost was on the order of $16,000, would be more expensive than the longer-term sustainable contract could be. But that all came out of the Girdwood Valley Service Area budget. So they have increased mill levy capability as a result of their adding law enforcement powers. They have not really used that power, that mill levy power yet, but they had in their fund balance $16,000 necessary to clear this contract.
Any questions on Girdwood?
Right, to just throw in, I went full immersion for the weekend in Forest Fair, everything from tie-dye. I used to wear sandals without socks. So, but It went very, very well. I saw no trouble at all. People who I spoke with, and I didn't ask how do you like Whittier Police here, but people brought it up and said, that's really neat, look, these people are here. So it was very, very, it was expensive, but it was very positive. Great experience, recommend Forest Fair to anyone.
And I will say to you, Chair, that unless someone on the welcome was wearing a kilt, then the actual Forest Fair members were still ahead of him. And then I will also relate my favorite anecdote from the weekend was that same kilt-wearing Forest Fair official told me that they historically had problems with drunken folks wandering into the fair. And this year has been a pattern of wandering drunkenly towards the fair with a six-pack in hand. But unlike in prior years, this year the Whittier police car pulled up next to him and said, "Hey buddy, do you need a ride?" And the guy said, "Can I bring my beer?" And the Whittier cop said yes, and then he went off somewhere that was not the fair.
Well, thanks, Bill, appreciate it, and those that didn't get the glimpse behind the scenes to see what it took to pull that together, it was, I know, a lot of work by your office and others in the administration at a very short notice to pull together the contracts with Whittier and everybody involved, and it was touch and go. It looked like whether or not, Forest Fair could go forward even for a while, so we do appreciate all the work you guys did.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Allen.
On a related subject, you might ask Chief Tolley to brief you on their experience substituting for the troopers in the turning an arm traffic safety programs.
You were gonna have to get to the meetings earlier.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Sorry.
No,
I was late.
No, we're very impressed and grateful for the information you had on that. It sounded like a job well done.
Sorry to interrupt.
No problem. With that, there's nothing left on our agenda other than audience participation. Is there anyone in our audience? Sir?
Yeah, Al Wolfbach, for the health department, on marijuana, like, I have diabetes. If I took marijuana, would that have the effect on that, or say other diseases, a negative effect? Because people probably don't realize that, if you have diseases, you can take this stuff, the interaction.
There would be an interaction, but it would depend on the person's medical situation and if that compromises any other treatments they're receiving. So it could affect that, but I wouldn't be able to tell you what the effect would be unless I had more information.
That might be a good public, information to offer.
The contraindicated effects, yeah. Thank you for bringing that up.
Consult your physician before.
That's what I was thinking.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, we'll get out of here a little early.
Oh, wait.
Oh.
I want.
Oh, sorry.
Going off of Birdwood's fun last weekend, I just want to remind everybody that this weekend is Bear Paw in Eagle River, so thousands will converge. It kicks off officially today, but really the carnival and stuff starts tomorrow. But it's the 6th through the 10th, and the big old parade is on Saturday. And if you're going, go early,
Right.
very early, because it's hard to get into Eagle River. But everybody's invited to come. Hope to see you there.
The tie-dye and sandals may not be the appropriate.
We have extra tubs.
Slippery sandals.
Seeing
Yeah,
that,
that's right.
we're adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.